All right, welcome. Kind of continuation of yesterday's or earlier today's, depending on what time zone you're in. Our chat we talked about really like why I'm doing this, why we're trying to expose issues with police work when it comes to drug enforcement. The biggest reason you have to remember is that this is the way we are getting kids institutionalized that are already there for other reasons as youth, from 18 to 25. That key age range there, that's where we're seeing all of recidivism come from. These guys are doing 5, 6, 7 prison terms from the age of 18 to 35 because we're getting them between 18 and 25 on a drug crime and making them felons. We as a society, we have to move through the systems that are there. And that's what needs to end because that cycle of recidivism of crime, it just is escalating criminal activity that wouldn't happen if we didn't otherwise take people who, if it wasn't for some mental illness and for some substance abuse, experimentation or abuse, we wouldn't have massive issues with crime rates and recidivism in the state, in the whole country. So that's what I'm going for here. And that's why it's such a passion project of mine. I was in drug enforcement for many, many years, that 13 years. In fact, everything I did involved drug enforcement. So SWAT's primary mission a lot of times is to take down high-risk warrants, execute those, or do takedowns, and what they are is they're on drug targets off because they've got guns. The reason they have all these guns, and they're a danger to law enforcement or they're a danger to, say, the public, is because of the violence that has to be done to protect a illicit business, like the drug trade. Just like in prohibition, we have extreme amounts of violence in order to protect their livelihood. If you think about like any other business, if a bodega gets robbed, they can call the police. They have an insurance. Not an ideal situation. They suffer and all those kind of things, but it's not the same with the drug trade or with the alcohol trade or with anything that's illegal, sex, all those other things. Violence always becomes a necessity and becomes part of those industries when you make it illegal, and there's a lot of money involved in it. Because taking all the morals, should they be involved in it or not? The fact of the matter is, this is someone's business, their livelihood, and how they're going to look at it. And when someone robs them, they have two things going on there. One, they have no access to call the police and defend themselves. So they're usually going to use violence, just pure violence. Two, there's a reputation. Everything we do in the criminal world, we've got reputation to consider. Reputation in prison, reputation on the streets. If you don't do anything about someone robbing you, you get known as a bitch who can get robbed, what's going to happen to that person, right? All their drugs, all their money are always going to get taken. Just like the guy in prison who doesn't do anything when someone takes his main line. What's everyone going to do? They're going to take his store. They're going to take his TV. They're going to take everything because he's a bitch that doesn't protect himself. I'm not defending any of that attitude, but that's the fact of the matter, and that's how it is. So when we have these aggressive drug enforcement strategies, when they're taking these people's livelihood or property, you see a lot more violence against police for completely no reason. For war on drugs, it's all it's doing is increasing our addiction rates, increasing our prison populations, raising our taxes, violent crime rates go up. From a humanistic perspective, it's just destroying our country, destroying the people within inside. That's enough of all politics, left or right. I don't give a shit. We're talking about people here. And most of all, it's making more dangerous drugs out there. We would not have a fentanyl epidemic, and my friends and your friends and daughters and sons and uncles, cousins, and yourself are dying. I don't know anyone who's not a fentanyl addict that hasn't already overdosed. Thank God they survived, but many don't, as we all know. So that's why this is a passion of mine. We get rid of drug enforcement the way it is, and to move drugs into the health space. It's a public health crisis. This is the real pandemic, and so is our mental health crisis. And the two of those are so intertwined. So much of the decline in mental health involves drugs. Whether it's drugs are being used to self-medicate or the drugs themselves have exacerbated an existing mental health condition. Drugs and mental health go hand in hand. That's not to say everyone has a drug problem, mental health, and that's to say everyone feel better than ones prescribed by the streets or whatever else you want to do some socioeconomic issues. Sticking in the realm of drug enforcement here. We are imprisoning people from 18 to 25. that is when they're getting in this endless cycle of recidivism and going back to prison over and over again. And the problem is we're not just doing that to dealers. We're charging people and arresting people, putting them in prison for things that they're not actually doing. They're not actual drug dealers. They're not some big guy moving weight, driving Cadillacs, pimping women, doing all these things, having this Scarface lifestyle, or whatever else you want to picture when you think of drug dealer. Now, most people charged and convicted of drug dealing in the United States are homeless, or they're kids crashing on couches and couch surfing. It's not this image that you have and that police like to propagate. I did myself. The drug dealers, they're not just drug users. Because most people are like, I don't really want to see addicts just go to prison. But that's the fact of the matter. We're putting addicts in prison. We're not putting drug dealers. So, let's check out my little TikTok screen here. Appreciate everyone commenting and who's watching here. Same thing on YouTube. So I'm going to try and do these daily, if not just a couple times a day when I think of it. Hey, I can't really go to bed. I'm still racing. It's 1 a.m. Let's get on here and do a live and get this information out there. We'll be doing a series together. It's going to be 6 to 8 videos, all directly on the very specifics of an undercover drug buy. People who want to have that access to that information, please, take a look at that. It's going to get posted the next couple of days here, and then the videos will get added as we go. But you'll get the ins and outs, the very juice, the details, how many buys are done, how they're done, what equipment they're using, what are the police allowed to do, what they can't do in the sense of a undercover drug buy. And that information will all be up there as well. The reason we're doing this is because we want them to end. Make it harder for police to do it, and they can't be done as much. And let's expose the fact of how many just painfully unethical practices are being said, hey, they're allowed to be done. We're allowing these things to happen. Courts have said, hey, this is allowed. Instead of saying, hey, that's entrapment, or hey, that's just unethical, or hey, why are we propagating these things? Why are we pushing this sort of enforcement and saying that, hey, that's okay, and we're going to use sketchy, things that make you just go, okay, you're going to do that. There's a reason most case law in the United States, case law being, police have to follow different things. You have to follow the actual letter of the law that's right there. You have to follow your department's policies. You may have to follow like an accrediting agency's policies, and you may also have to follow, some like, I'm a instructor in this discipline, so I have to follow this set of standard operating procedures. The big thing is case law. That's historical law that's happened, decisions that have been rendered by a judge, and now the police have to follow it because a precedent has been established by case. So one that most people would know would be Miranda, right? You hear your Miranda rights. The rights are not named after Miranda. They're not anything to do with him. They're some of your constitutional rights. They're basic that you should be allowed to know. And they found out, hey, not everyone's educated in this country, people with language barriers. We as a judge, we're going to say, like, hey, these exist. We're going to say police should tell people about these rights. And that's how Miranda came to be known as a rights. They're Miranda's rights. Well, no, they're constitutional rights. So you had to, now as a police officer, and everyone kind of knows from movies, TV, they've been arrested, you're read your rights. You're advised of those things before police can ask questions. They have to know those things. That's where case law comes from. Most case law that we have from arrests, especially when it comes to search and seizure, anything that's your Fourth Amendment, all comes from drugs. And the reason it comes from drugs is because that's where all the shady bullshit police work comes from. Quite frankly, it's like, where does any set of rules come from? It's where people fucking breaking rules all the time. Because dope cops love to break rules and push that. I've got case law for me in the state of Washington for search and seizure. Guess what, right? No shock. At the time, like high-fived and was like, all right, got case law for you. Because it's seen as that. It is a game in law enforcement. It is like, the way I compare it is like, why'd you get along with so many drug dealers? Why did drug dealers not have a problem with you being in prison? Well, there's a big story. There's a lot behind that. I already gotten kind of vetted and allowed to join and sort of blessed. But then on just a social level, why we got along, it was because of the fact that, I like when you're playing football, you might hate that crosstown rival. You might want to knock their head off. You might do some physical damage to them. But like the next week, you're not like out there trying to track them down and kick their ass. No, you might give them a high five, like, oh, good game, man, you knocked the shit out of me on that tackle or something like that. Kind of what it was when you're like following your rules as a cop. and they're following theirs and pushing both of them, we got along. It's kind of like the crosstown road. As long as someone wasn't just an absolute dick, it was like, just don't be a dick, and you have that. When I was a narcotics detective, had guys, they fist bump me and stuff when I see them. And they weren't snitches, they weren't anything like that. It was just kind of that agreed, yeah, all in the game, man, all in the game. It was watch Wire, kind of knows that one, and it is absolutely true. All in the game. That proves to you how not real serious cops take it as far as, and I didn't take it, as I say, from a moral perspective. It wasn't like, oh man, I have to do good today and I'm going to really make a difference in the world because I arrested someone for selling a gram of coke. No. It was about making yourself look good in a certain way. You got to do the fun, go fast stuff. Being a narcotics cop or detective, even just a cop on the streets who does a lot of like narcotics enforcement, that's how you get promotions. That's kind of how you build yourself up a reputation as a meat eater, someone who can really do the work. And then that's when things like SWAT, K9, other detective divisions, you want to be more of like a major crimes detective, task force. A lot of people who want to work for like federal agencies and be parts of like organized crime task force, other higher end drug task force. You make that doing street groups. You do the street enforcement stuff. It's also the only thing in law enforcement you can really go around and go look for and find crime that way. You can sit on businesses for hours and hours. You're probably not going to see a burglary. You can sit in a shitty neighborhood. Some of people's skins get a lot different too, and there's a lot more opportunities for people to make crime, especially if you're willing to push the boundaries of enforcement to do that. And that's where a lot of that comes from, that over-enforcement, aggressive enforcement in communities of color, is because, one, they don't have the ins with your mayor, city councilman, and police chief like people do in the paler areas. There also is a population density there. There is a income disparity that's probably the biggest issue there. So now police can go sit in those areas and they can go find crime. The kind of little joke is if you didn't want to go do that kind of stuff and you're seen as being lazy, it's like, oh, you're just like a firefighter, huh? Firefighters don't go around, drive around finding fires. The police can only find criminal activity typically for drugs. And so it's a really, really easy way to make it a targeted enforcement thing. And that's why you really do see targeted enforcement in black, brown, poor white trash neighborhoods. Simplistic, because that's where they can go find enforcement. Very small levels of stuff, too. And you also know where people have been released to prison. Well, the poor family that lives in these neighborhoods. And so now you have directed enforcement over there. Then the kind of enforcement is, right, again, we're back on that topic of a dealer. We're going to say, oh, but they're a dealer. We're going after a dealer. Not so fast. You're not going to use it most of the time. Most people possessing drugs are possessing to use them for themselves. A lot of times what these deals do, street level enforcement by law enforcement, is they are taking someone who's a user, taking advantage of that fact, they're having them go find them drugs, traffic-like activity, bring the drugs back, and then that person breaks themselves off some, gets their money, and goes. And that's how they will afford their drug habit. There's a lot of people on the streets, that's pretty much how they get drugs. They're middlemen, getting high. That's probably more than half of your street rips are done like that. In the next level, the vast majority of actual people that you could probably get the label of drug dealer on, what they're just doing though, is they're barely scraping by. They might be dealing actual cash, not just in acts for drugs, splitting stuff off or doing sex acts or something like that. But they're not some baller. They're the ones who are barely making a living, if you want to call it. They're housed people more often than not, as opposed to unhoused, which would be your people bringing stuff off. That's not to say that limited to that. So the vast majority of people getting arrested by law enforcement for drug crimes are not drug dealers. But they're going away for drug dealing crimes. And you also have the issue of just the creativity and the creative writing that can be done in a police report to turn someone from having drugs that they're using for themselves to get by every day. And these may be functioning people addicts. So this is a public health issue, this is a personal choice issue that now they're getting enforced as a life-altering, probably potentially life-ruining decision by our system, by law enforcement, to now have that person become a felon. If you think the title of felon especially for a drug crime as a minor one in the United States in this era, you would be woefully mistaken. I don't have a drug tag on my felony tag or whatever the fuck you want to call it. I'm a felon, okay, but it's not for a drug crime. Just having the felon one impacts so many things: rental, employment, how you're treated by anyone in the system, especially law enforcement or the courts, renting an apartment. All of those things become much, much more difficult, and you are not looked at the same as when you were not a felon. But then you add it as a drug crime, especially a drug dealing crime. Well, now your access to financial aid, like Pell Grants, all that kind of stuff, anything involving money, yeah, your credit's all gone. Yeah, you're not getting anything. You're not getting any sort of boost right there. So there's a big, big tag for taking. This is a huge, huge deal to make someone a felon for a drug crime in the United States of America. It's done so often. Most people going to actual prison are going there for the first time based on a drug crime. There's a statistic as many as 80% of all people in U.S. federal prisons are there in a drug crime. So whether you think of drugs as the issue itself, people using them or not, that's your choice. That's that. You know, where you have the attitude of, hey, you stay for responsible use. Regardless, harm reduction needs to be the policy. Law enforcement and the courts need to have no involvement in drugs whatsoever. If you care about your rent rates, you care about your insurance rates, you're just a selfish person, all you care about is yourself and your finances, and I'm not judging. I've been there myself in times, and that's probably most of my attitude when I was back as a cop. Fairly selfish individual, but the fact of the matter is, it benefits you for there not to be a war on drugs, because your life will come cheaper. Your cost of living will become cheaper. If the money spent on all this enforcement, all this over imprisoning people, was to be reduced, your tax rates would go down. That's probably never going to happen. Let's not be unrealistic there. I'm not going to get all political with that bullshit, but at least that money would get used towards something for good. You know, maybe we have some better roads, maybe we have some better stuff like that, or better hospitals and healthcare system for these addictions, support things that need to happen. Crime rates will go down. People will overdose less. The cartels will get less money. International terrorist organizations will get less money. There are many, many things that would benefit us to not have a war on drugs. People's mental health. The biggest thing is, man, I don't want my friends dying of fentanyl overdoses. I don't want to hear a friend talk about, you know, their good friend that just did a little bit of coke at a party on their birthday and had fentanyl in it and he died. Like, did that guy deserve to die? I don't think so. So we need to end law enforcement's tactics on this. That's why I advocate so much. And that's why it's such an unethical practice for that. So the way cops do undercover drug buys, it's manipulative. It is coercive. It is probably like your person with narcissistic personality disorders, like dream fucking job. Like, you literally get to manipulate people into telling on other people. You manipulate them into being like your friend too, because you're always like buddies or your snitches. And behind your back, you're calling them a snitch, you're calling them a rat, you're calling them a bitch, you're calling them all these horrible things. But to them, you're like, oh yeah, good job, buddy. I got you, bro. All this kind of stuff that's happening. So you gotta be a good actor, you gotta be good manipulating, stuff like that. Gotta be kind of charismatic and all that. And this is just to run CIs and run informants. To actually be undercover, whole different skill set. You don't need to be over the top with it. In fact, like, softer, lower approach is the better with it. I was really good because of the look I had. I wasn't even as harsh look as I have now, but I did not ever look like a cop. Even in uniform, I looked so damn young when I started. No one believed I was a cop. So it was really kind of a no-brainer to make me undercover. It's like, he's dressed in a police uniform with a badge on in a fucking patrol car, and people are still like, "Is that guy a cop?" So yeah, I became an undercover after a year. Basically, I got off probation. Probation as an officer, like your probationary period, through training, probation. I'd already been in shooting, so I proved myself, been an explorer, all those kind of things, and then I got into being a detective. So mine was kind of like a no-brainer in getting in there, and then went through all the schools, worked for about every federal agency there is. Because I'm up north, near the border, near the water, and so there's stuff coming through Canada, You've got I-5 corridor. There's a major drug pipeline in that area. So there's a lot of work to do. No shortage of that. But on the street rip side of it, we start at, found that it's just really easy. All you have to do is go down and start talking to people. You start talking. When we're running a CI, we're running like an informant though. That's where all that manipulation tactics come in and stuff. You're dangling a carrot over people's heads. And the one that's most used, especially when we're dealing with opiate users, is just people not getting sick. You're manipulating them because they're going to get sick that night. You're getting them to try and tell. But what it is people don't just have to like tell and give information, unless it's on some major thing, like they can tell you where a body is, or they're telling you about like presidents getting assassinated. You're going to have to do something. You got to do work, and that's people actually doing buys. And someone has a number of felonies. It's usually a ratio of how many felonies you're going to get them off of to how many targets or people they have to go towards. Then everyone they go towards, you got to do 3 buys on, and there's a really specific way you structure that. And all of this is done. Everything they do is one to try and keep that CI active, because you want to try and keep using it. You want to get as much, meat off the bone, so to speak, as possible off that CI. But they're disposable. They're not, they don't care about their safety. The officers doing it. The reason they don't want them to get hurt is because they could potentially get in trouble themselves or something like that. So just follow the basic safety procedures. They're not doing much to keep them safe. And they keep their identity safe only because you can use them longer. So some of the stuff, the structure, just keep the identity longer hidden. But most of it's just to ensure a conviction. Basically, throw so much shit on the wall that the person won't do anything but take a plea. So tomorrow morning, I'll probably get back on here again and talk a little bit more. I'll probably skip right to it. We're going to talk about what the CI has to do when they go out and buy drugs with the police. So please like, comment, share all that stuff.